To mówię ja. O. Dobry wieczór. Musicie włączyć swoje mikrofony.
It's me. Good evening. You have to turn on your microphones. I'm now speaking to those who will be using the mics. Testing. Over to the four women on the podium. We wanted to start by revisiting yesterday and the session dedicated to the institutions of culture. Rafał Milach, during the slam, he repeated the 19th lesson by Timothy Snyder, defend the institutions. Institutions are the capacity, the resource we have, and we can use to make a difference, to create feminization, change of the logic of work and social relationships. I work for an institution which has to be defended. Now, it needs to be defended. The community is doing their best to defend us, and I can feel it, and I'm determined to defend it too, but provided that the institution itself gets transformed and this transformative potential is put to a good use. And a lot needs to be changed, also in my institutions and all the institutions that we all work for. We have designed a list, it's an appeal for 10 major jobs to be done by feminist institutions of culture. First, free culture must be free in every aspect of the word. Stop overproduction, slow down production processes, be ecological at work, give up on that race to become the most progressive institution of culture. Number two, we don't exploit bodies and ecosystem resources. We respect private time of all our associates. We are aware of how we work. When we work, we must find time for communication and thought. 4, we empower one another. We have a flat hierarchy. Decision processes are spread. There is mutual respect. An institution that cannot afford to pay for full-time employment with junk contracts, outsourced cleaning services and other programming services, such an institution should never have an agenda. We commit to pursue ecological policy, to reduce waste, segregate waste, to save energy, to reduce emissions. We focus on our language and anti-violence, anti-discriminatory practices. We implement anti-discriminatory procedures and a toolkit to prevent any type of oppression. We cooperate in partnership with initiatives and social partners. We learn from one another, respect our mutual needs and inhibitions. We fight for higher wages in culture and for fair, equitable distribution of those wages. We are audience-focused. We build sustainable relationship with the audience. We inspire each other to be creative. We eliminate barriers in access to culture. Feminism, not fascism. Thank you. Can you hear me? Edwin Bendyk will now be a Cassandra, and he will read a preface to our debate on feminization of politics. Okay, I'll do my best to be this prophet of the doom in this distinguished audience. The full argumentation is available from our booklet, so that there you can read all of it. Now I'll just give you the highlights. So let me read out a couple of paragraphs. We often repeated that the world as we know it has just come to an end. It's high time we realized that this is the case. We refuse to believe it. Our day-to-day behavior, customs, institutional practices, they still belong with what makes the world end, but without any outlook into the future. What about the challenges we do not know of, not to mention those that are still already ahead of us. As we inaugurate this year's forum, Ivana Kush repeated the Paris May 1968 slogan, "Give power to imagination." Unfortunately, our forum in Paris today proved that imagination is what we need the most. That's what we are lacking in. Imagination means that we look at the reality out of the box. Without the famous tin doctrine, there is no alternative, announced many years ago by Margaret Thatcher. Lack of such imagination is the reason why the newly elected French president, who stirred up so much revolutionary hopes to revisit policy making, not just in France, but all over Europe, that's why he started the good old scheme of things. He reduced the taxes to encourage the rich to invest in the economy. That didn't happen, obviously. To help the climate, he raised the fuel tax, which of course hit the most poor residents of peripheral areas who have to use a car. Yesterday, March for the Climate had 20,000 participants. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of yellow vests protested all over France. We don't know what political cascade to expect from this revolt, but that just goes to show that the end of the world as you know it is taking place now. One of the symptoms that we totally failed to manage as an international community is the Syria Civil War, the first event of such a scale directly affected by climate change. Let's flex our imagination. Most of our participants here have a good chance to live as long as 2050. The kids who are or who used to be here may well live to a new century. They will then live in a world inhabited over 10 billion people, warmer by 3, 4, 5 degrees Celsius than today, if life in such a world is possible in the first place. To save them the uncertainty, we, us, those who participate in the forum, over our lifetimes until the middle of that century, we should make sure that no greenhouse gas emissions take place. So that means over the next 12 years, until 2030, we should reduce emissions by 45%. The trouble is that if we follow the current course of events in 2030, at the best, will just stop the increase in emissions, because the increase has been perennial. We know it very well from international reports discussed last week in Katowice COP. We know it, but our president announced over the next 200 years we're going to burn coal. It may sound absurd, but let's look at ourselves. If you fly to Venice Biennale, that's just what you do to ruin 1 year of being a vegan. One trip to Barcelona is worse than the savings you do when you use a bike for a year. So that means we are no different from Andrzej Duda, whatever words you use. I don't want to flagellate ourselves for hypocrisy, but it's a symptom of a very serious disease, lack of imagination, which prohibits understanding of our condition nowadays. First of all, we live in the times of interregnum between the old and the new rule. The old institutional configuration is over, but will the new one be less oppressive? That's not sure. We live in Anthropocene, the era of man. Now we have the power to shape the geosystem, and yet we are not able to secure a safe future for the new generations. And last but not least, we are at the era of the end of male domination. But patriarchy is going strong. It is fighting with a vengeance, and the more illegitimate it is, the more oppressive it's likely to be. But such violence is not the biggest threat. We are now sailing uncharted waters. We may encounter a perfect storm when all these processes come together as one. The old religious, social, political forms of control of oppression are out. Once violence is liberated, as von Clausewitz said, it triggers this mimetic mechanism of escalation until total annihilation. So when we think of fascism today, you have to take that perception into account. The world of violence, violence that feeds on itself, that doesn't lead to any end. It's just fueled by eco-crisis and shrinking resources. If you believe that feminism in culture and in politics is a good alternative, that's the perspective. Let's eliminate oppression. Let's find a new post-patriarchy way to control the oppression. That's what's at stake for this discussion. Agata, that's it from me now.
was przestraszyć, tak żebyście...
Edwin's job was to scare you into focusing, into thinking about tools that would help you go beyond this realm, this zone within which we can't be saved. The mechanisms that are being used by societies and the authorities today have failed, and they're leading towards disaster. We are calling for the feminization of politics, and the purpose of this is to increase the participation of women in government, in the authorities, but changing or gender disproportion won't solve the problem. So this is not, we won't be talking about increasing or not increasing. We'll be talking about the feminization of politics as a way of changing the way of thinking and changing the values that we're basing the mechanisms of social activity on instead of hierarchy. We've said this a number of times in these last 2 days, but since not everybody was with us all the time, let me just say that we want to move away from the old values, the values that are popular, that are compromised, like hierarchy, an arbitrarily imposed natural order, or relying on arbitrary tradition, competition, the need to consume and produce, and towards values such as cooperation, care, cooperation, transparency, and saving resources. We've talked about this in many ways, and in the last debate we've had practitioners, and we had practitioners of politicians, and in this debate we have people, hands-on politicians, people who go beyond, who operate in more than one capacity, who are experts from various in various fields, because these are the people who find it easier to cross lines and boundaries, for whom it's easier to work with the imagination, and it's easier to work with something that they, now my guests. Dr. Justyna Glusman, who's an economist, lecturer, social activist, city movements. She ran for mayor of Warsaw. She was not elected mayor of Warsaw, but she was invited to the city council, where she has an important function, and she's the coordinator for sustainable development at the Warsaw City. In the city of Warsaw, then we have Aldona Machnowska-Góra, I didn't run, who was activist, co-author of the Warsaw program for cultural development, also the deputy director of repertory theater for and third sector theater, and now she's also invited to work with the city authorities as coordinator for culture and dialogue. I introduced these two guests because the fact that they have the functions they do shows that there is a gradual change in the structure and mechanisms of the city. Next to me is Joanna Wawrzeczka, whom I've known her a long time. She runs the Political Critique Cultural Center in Cieszyn, and she also she's also a university lecturer specializing in art, and she's been a city council. She's a city councilor in Cieszyn for the past since last month. And our next guest is Dr. Ewa Rumińska-Zimny. Ewa Rumińska, who's with the Warsaw School of Economics and the Women's Congress. Jonna Scheuring-Wielgus, a politician, activist, and leader of the newly established Teraz party. Dr. Katarzyna Sztop-Rutkowska from Białystok, sociologist from Białystok, one of the founders of the city movement in Białystok called the Initiative for Białystok. She also ran for mayor of that city. She was not elected, but she was invited. And my next guest is, our last guest is Professor Mache Pedula, who is a sociologist and also wears a number of hats. He's a theorist, academic lecturer, but he tells all politicians what they should and shouldn't do, and has been supporting Robert Biedroń recently, and he's written a report that caused quite a stir and a discussion. This is a report, the change for the better in the city of Miastko from a small town perspective. And this report and the book that we later published in Krytyka Polityczna called The New Authoritarianism. So this report indicated that everything is different than we imagined, and it's not since all of us have a different perspective and political, so let's employ your political imagination and how, from your standpoint, where some of you are in a bird's eye view, some of you have tried and were in the opposition. And what does it look like? How can we go outside this old field, and how is this possible from your perspective? How is it possible? And what do you think? So let's begin with Dr. Justyna Glusman. That's a daunting task. Thank you very much. I crossed the Great Wall of China by moving from a candidate by contender for mayor, and when entering the city council, I stepped inside the lion's den. I'm still trying to reconnoiter the area. I'm still trying to figure out what it's about. I hope we'll be able to implement certain changes, and I'm fully aware of the fact that not all changes can be put into effect, and with the position that was given me, I won't be able to put into practice to deliver on the urban movement program. And this has to do with, and my voters generally were very enthusiastic when we announced that I had received this proposition, had this offer from the new mayor of Warsaw, and I intended to join this, but city urban movement activists had doubts, said I was moving to that I would be bought, that I would be gobbled up and disappear politically, that I couldn't do anything or introduce any change. On the other hand, and I know this because I feel that and I see that party activists and people who are with the mayor, many of them were opposed to introduce me, to let me in, to give me access to information, to letting an outsider into the inner circle. I'm not a politician. My political world is something that I've been building up for the past 6 months. That's what I'm doing. Previously, I was an academic. I was also working with local government. I was with government, but my role was purely advisory. I was an expert, a specialist. And I never actively took part in politics. I was never a member of any party. And this was the first time that I entered these circles, this world, and the possibilities I see in my position as coordinator for sustainable development. There are possibilities, so we can stress other different values. And the offer that came from the mayor, from Mayor Trzaskowski, shows that he values, that he also that these are values that are important to him, that this isn't just window dressing, this isn't just for show, but taking a person who works with public space, friendly cities, green areas, and inviting that person to position, the highest position ever given to a representative of the urban movement. So this is a new opening, and I intend to do all I can to take advantage of that, to make use of that. I intend to fight. I intend to try and make urban greenery and issues of smog, which isn't defined institutionally, and this is a problem that's too much for many offices. So you need coordination of several agencies to introduce, if you want to change into low emission burners or furnaces, and then you have car pollution. And so I agreed that I would work with home furnaces, or we can have ambitions, we can want to come up or have an answer that will totally do away with pollution, but that will be possible only if we act on different fronts. But I'm very pragmatic when it comes to life, when it comes to what I'm doing. So I set myself goals, interim goals that are possible to achieve. So this might lead to a disappointment among some, but I prefer to give myself a achievable target, and here I'm very stubborn, I'm very insistent, and the projects I've done have shown that I can be successful using this approach. But what I would want is to act in a different way. I want to adopt a different approach. I want to be more transparent, more participatory. Of course, following the first week, my first week in my present position, I wasn't able yet to express, to kind of give that substance. Okay, I'm already hearing, for instance, that, but what will you do, or why is there no program? Why is there, well, we don't know yet. It's too early in the day. This work needs to be planned. Today, there's a discussion on the budget. I have to know what budget I have. I'm trying to obtain this budget. I'm talking to decision makers. I'll address city councillors because if someone is a priority, then it's given a priority budget that's reflected in the budget. But only once we know what the financial resources are can we plan our actions, can we present them, can we present or show the items which will require social consultation with civil society. There are certain mechanisms. I want to take advantage of the mechanisms that exist. In 2017, I was the head of the Social Dialogue Commission for the Natural Environment, and I want I want this institution, which is kind of flagging recently, and I want this institution to become a forum for a dialogue with society, and a forum that will allow me to communicate and consult, and where we'll be able to talk about solutions together. So specifically what objectives, I don't really know yet. I know what values I subscribe to. I know what I would like to achieve I'll be trying to move away from furnaces and boilers. This is not a main source of pollution in all districts, but it's mainly outlying districts. But I think this is achievable, and of course I'll do all I can to support these actions and decisions that generally are in favor or support sustainable development, for instance, in transport, limiting car use, in promoting mass transit, improving mass transit, and shifting moving resources towards mass transit rather than individual or passenger cars. But here all I can do is exert some sort of pressure. That's not my prerogative. And that's what my job description is. So I'm currently focusing on a specific, small but very important activity that can bring about a change. And here I want to put into place the goals that I had when joining this. So I still lack the basic data. And it did change very quickly. So you've been given a car, but you're only just learning to drive. I know the diagnosis, but I really don't. I need a very detailed diagnosis and a detailed feasibility study. And it's very complicated because there are many stakeholders and many factors that will determine whether this city develops in a sustainable way, whether we can replace these furnaces and old boiler rooms. So I'm responding to impatient residents, impatient citizens who obviously have the right to have choice. Okay, Justina, you're in office, so what's in it for us? But a week into my job, so I think a month is actually a time when this diagnosis could be made and planned. Now a question to Aldona Machnowska-Góra. Since you supported Rafał Trzaskowski, you helped him write his program, you had more time to see how this mechanism works, how the city operates. And is there an expectation, a need that you need to change the mechanism, change the workings? Do you have a scenario plan? Yes, I do. But first I wanted to say something else, and this is not off topic. So I want the next Congress to be called "Let's Talk," not talking, not doing. So words, not deeds. So I saw the streaming online. I felt that some debates, some of these meetings, especially those about culture and not just culture, could have just as well have been held in 2007. In 2007, and we have people here who were with us in the Social Dialogue Commission in Miodowa Street when we were trying to convince the director of the Department of Culture to have 3-year programs for NGOs. We had the same people saying exactly the same things because not enough, and so I say, let's deeds, not words. That's what I'm calling for, and that's something that we ought to be striving for in the next time, because this time is short. And what happened in Gdańsk, we have NGOs and non-public culture institutions which deserve proper representation, and then pollution, smog. So these aren't things that we found out this weekend. We were aware of this, and these meetings, these dialogues, these conversations in this forum are important. But I think it's time we started making a change and got down to business. And I also think, and I personally was close to the mayor, then candidate, Rafał Trzaskowski, because I texted him. I mean, I knew him previously. I texted him. I said, Rafał, I know this town. I want it to change, so let's meet and maybe we can help each other. So I decided to help him work on the program, draft the program after he'd won the election, once we knew that it would be good, or at least fairly good, things would be fairly good. We said that we needed to change the way the city is managed. We needed to begin project-based or task-based management.
3 nowe stanowiska w zarządzie.
3 new positions in the board. Apart from Justina's position and mine, there's a less maybe prominent position. There's the director of the city office authorities, somebody who has their own, somebody who's a deputy mayor who will be responsible for reforming the administration, the office staff, the administration, beginning from emancipation and equal treatment through the work of civil servants, and there's also the task-based work of this office.
Oczywiście
And all the things, of course, they might not happen. We may all fail, big time, small time, whatever. But until we all take such steps, well, basically, we'll still just keep talking and talking. I apologize. Well, I think that's why women, well, it's not against men, but, women are more emotional. They take decisions less rationally. Sometimes it seems that they enter the sloppy ground that everybody would discourage them from doing. Maybe that's why it seems like women in management, they will fail, but at least they will try to make a change. A real change. Oh, excuse me, I also want to say that these changes, we have to change institutions. I hope we can change something in the city office, city hall, but we should also change our own institutions. I have this track record for many years. I used to work for an NGO. I love NGOs. I am critical of NGOs. For a few years, I worked in the city institution in a theater, so I love this institution and I'm critical of it. And that is my appeal before all those who can make a difference in the institutions they manage. If you can, just do it. Paweł Łysak, who, as we all know, is a woman, and he will try to make a change in his institutions, but the directors of public theaters of those 3 days, how many of them did we see, such directors of public theaters? We had some? One. Just one? Okay, never mind. That's not the point. The point is that, the talk, does it go a long way? Where does it resonate? NGOs, as we all know, they're always active. Maybe they have too much free time on the weekends. They are just everywhere. But they should also evolve and change. You have to change things at home too. By way of a small anecdote, at home I have adult children. There's a bit of a terror to buy household cosmetics in glass packagings, multi-use. My shampoo, my washing powder is in a jar. 2 young women. So I encourage you, revolution starts at home. Talk about waste, yes. Talk about smog, but also stop using your car, stop buying disposable packaging. Yes, but you have overlooked a key point, because you see, it's not Paweł Łysak who kindly agreed. He's a lovely person, and he's a member of a program team for this forum. And the forum isn't just 2 days of talk. No, the forum is a crowning achievement of many, many months of a process that has been going on here. It's a serious process that involves all our associates. I mean, we keep inviting more and more people. Agata Adamiecka and Igor Stokwiszewski, Marta Kyle, maybe they will take over in a moment. It's a very deep, serious process, so it may not be effective yet. But the plea that was read from the podium, that is one of the fruits of that process. So all in all, the forum isn't just the talk. It's a part of a long-term process, which is very hard in this institution, okay? It's not easy. It's also hard for Paweł Łysak himself. But it's an attempt at thinking out of the box, in contrast to one more debate, one more conference, when we say things have to change, and then we go back to the incumbent institutions and things go as they were. Edwin said, we all ride a bike, we never eat meat, but we like to take a holiday 5 times in a year, taking a plane trip. So we take it very seriously. Hence my question to you, a person who's very powerful. You are a very powerful person. So here's my question. Are you going to take a look? Because you couldn't do it before, it's only now been announced, but is this an inspiration for you? And will you take a look at the process? And do you think, because that would be crossing the border, and that's what we want, to cross the border, do you think that other Warsaw and beyond Warsaw institutions could undertake this serious, deep process to forego the hypocrisy that we have excellent progressive institutions with progressive theatre in Warsaw and debates about hot topics, that there have to be equality, labor rights, and yet these very institutions violate these rights. There is violence between the workers and so on and so forth. So we just want to make a difference, seriously, as those who've been talking about it for years, sitting in the room. Let's look behind, let's look, ahead, and make sure that it's not just walk and somebody is abused next door and you turn a blind eye to it. Yes, I agree. And sometimes directors of public institutions, they have a lot of independence, okay? They shape the employment, the wages, and all the rest of it in their institutions for which they are responsible, So it's not really true that you cannot have any effect from the city level. It can be soft measures like the best practice code, good practice guidance, and other examples. A couple of years ago, the City Hall of Warsaw sent an order to all the cultural institutions to implement anti-mobbing, anti-discriminatory policy in each institution. And after a year, we were requested once again to somehow write a report on those policies to prove that this toolkit was put in place. So we have the instruments, but on top of the instruments, we need to have a good attitude. All of us, we must have a good will to implement it. First, in the City Hall, because you cannot ask others to do it if you haven't done it yourself. Institutions subordinate to the City Hall of Warsaw can only follow the example from the top, set by the City Hall, of course. So that's why I mentioned Paweł as a person who's a very good example of someone who is doing that. Because you don't want to think that this pilot scheme here in Teatr Powszechny, it will succeed or it will fail and that'll be the end of it. No. Right to the contrary. Let's get the ball rolling. Let's start making waves, fighting for it. You're going to be unpopular, trust me. I'm sure you realize that cultural and public institutions, just like NGOs, they hate intervention, they hate interference, pressure, and being, attacked in any way. They will see it as an attack for the artist freedom. Yeah, and perhaps talking about the way these institutions operate, this great autonomy that they have, sometimes it boils down to privatization, such as we have directors who have been directors since time immemorial. They think it's like their own farm. And if you ask them, don't you think there's so many great people who could be good for the job? They say, well, but nobody has the experience in running these very institutions like I have. So who can be better than me? Who can prevail? So perhaps the autonomy of the institution is something that has to be subject to some rethinking. Okay, let me move on to the person who is much worse off than you. Joanna Poprzeczka. She's become the city councillor for Cieszyn town, but you're in a minority group. There's 21 people in the city council and your committee only has 3 members. So from your perspective, you are part of the authority. In theory, you should have some power, but what instruments would be available to you under your specific circumstances? Can you hear me? Okay. Well, to begin with, I'm so stressed because I'm in Warsaw, not in Cieszyn. Secondly, it's for the first time, really, that I'm in that situation. And believe me, it's so different because normally I'm at the end of a line. I just look at you thanks to a streaming, and then it's a totally different perception. So I will comment on the final intervention in a moment because I have to disagree in a way. But first, let me take your question briefly. Cieszyn, the town with 36,000 residents, but practically 32,000 only live there. So the population is 32,000. it's such a different case. Everybody can approach you. Everybody knows who I am. They can call me by the name. And the campaign that we did was a door-to-door kind of acquisition type of campaign, prospecting in this very pair of shoes. The residents know me by the name, by the face, me and my colleagues. There's 21 councillors in Cieszyn and 3 of us. 8 to the right wing, and those who could be the civic platform are mayor. She says that Margaret Thatcher is her role model, so that just goes to show where we are there. And she's actually complimented for that. So we are either the majority for this side or for that side, which is not that bad, okay? We are this final mile. We can decide about who will win the vote, either on the right or on the left. That means a lot of accountability. I feel the burden of responsibility after 2 sessions and the 2 meetings I was a part of in a council. It seems to me that this accountability is actually greater compared to the majority situation. Each and every time we have to decide, are we going this way or that way? So it's like dual burden of responsibility. So first a comment about the intervention and then a few more points, including this Cassandra, prophet of doom. Edwin used to be a panelist once. I remember that very well. It was great. But let me get to the point. I really don't like it when I hear that women tend to be more emotional. Come on, Bourdieu has taught us a long time ago that we have 4 times greater competence than men, more often than not. That's what Cieszyn town taught me. So I'm upset, I'm anxious, I have, red color on my face. So physically, I look emotional. I'm not cool, reserved like Mache, sitting there scratching his neck, totally unfathom about the speech. Well, that doesn't mean that there is no value to my temperature, emotion. That is a measure of my knowledge to you. So please, let's not be guilty of being emotional. You say that we just talk and we don't walk. Well, I've been in the Institute for 19 years, and Govin, what he did to us was like a roller coaster right now. But the process of, like we're a company, not a university anymore. We've had it for the 19 years, and even before that, people tell me it had been on the agenda. So for 19 years, we haven't had a debate. What should that institute represent? What should a university be? What should be the relationship between the institute and the university? And more importantly for me, what should be our role vis-a-vis the outside world and the university itself? Wojtek, don't do it. Oh God, that's embarrassing. Cieszyn. Okay, so perhaps in Warsaw you are tired with all the talk, but it can't be really the case. We are tired just talking internally within our own community. It means we have no outreach. And that's what we should do. Let's find a way to communicate, to get the message across to the outside world. Unfortunately, we're still kind of enclosed because of the language we use, because of the people we meet, always the same faces. So maybe there's been too much talk, I admit. There's a bit of a deja vu, all the culture congress, the fora. But on the other hand, I don't know, I came here and I know I'm gonna go back home stronger. So I do need this talk. It will help me revive and recuperate my strength. Does it mean I'm no longer an activist because I'm a city councillor now? I know you never said it out loud, but I think it was somewhere in the background. You're a councillor now, so perhaps you're not an activist anymore. Well, that's a question for the next 5 years. I believe I will never, ever stop being an activist, a researcher, an artist, a mother, and all the rest of it. Because that's me. This phenomenon of my work, that's networking, and building bridges. That's the value I cherish the most. That is actually visible in my track record. We always build a team. We always have people who are our followers. We try to create this value together. Always somebody will be a front man. There will be this person in the avant-garde, but that's unavoidable, and you also need all the people behind you, so to speak. So all these roles, they have to be reconciled. This is the type of experience that will guide me looking ahead. So it's not enough to be a counselor. I have to put on an artist hat and maybe sing in front of a microphone. Look at our Czechoslovakian meeting, streaming, you'll have a good laugh. Recently it was fun too, there was no streaming, but I had to explain why do they need 3 paralyzers? Our city guards have 3 paralyzers. I believe they shouldn't have them. I want to redefine their mission of the city guards. You know what they say? They say in a dark alley, some fly-by-night districts, there are people who use designer drugs. I find it hard to believe, but well. Okay, fair enough. During the campaign, we did a lot of work. We built our agenda by crisis. So it's a crisis of imagination, of social bonds, and of trust. It was such a revelation for me to realize that people love talking about ideas when I was walking door to door, from doorstep to doorstep, and not about me renovating their street with some rotting. They said, do you remember we have this hole in the pavement on the road? That was only at the end of our conversation, but the bulk of our contact, it was about imagination, the crisis of imagination. That was very inspiring, and that gives me a lot of food for thought, because now, having had this exposure to our constituency, we have to go back to the council and to the broader audience. Let me go back in a moment what I mean by a broader audience. Okay, I got it. 3 minutes. Fine. So for me, the crisis of imagination was a gripping point. And something by way of Ethiopia, a high line cable car above Chechen. Why not? They have it in Bogota, and it was very thought-provoking. Second thought, the language. Budget language is incredible. For example, we fight with drug addiction and we counteract alcohol abuse. Come on, what is the difference between the two? 2 different verbs for the same thing, addiction. Language of documents. When I read the document carefully, I was able to point at a few things the councillors never expected. I gave them a 5-pager with my semantic language editing notes. Problems that you can see through the language. Our mayor, the lady who became a mayor, she said that Cieszyn is like a business. No, we must not allow that. Such narration should be disallowed. It was not easy for me. I had to pick up my strength. I didn't want to do it, but yes, you have to stand up, do a performance, say, no pasaran. A town is not a business. They say, give us this shitty jobs, like to be in the audit committee, whereas in fact, I want to do something more important. You have to stand up and say, this is not a shitty job. This is a part and parcel of what this town needs. And also the visual language. We didn't have any banners. We just had a little brochure and the website beautifully designed. Very, very good job. And the language, yes, I covered that. Cooperation, I didn't have time to talk about it. So cooperation, and that will be the end of it for me now. Cooperation, it's super important. Cooperation in answer to a crisis. Cooperation, but not making deals. Even before I announced I would want to be a mayor, a councillor, when the Civic Platform and Nowoczesna party, they approached me. It was like a cheap TV series. Let's make a deal. Let's make a deal. And I say, what does it mean to make a deal? I'm not playing your game, you know? So here's my manifesto. Let's not play their game. Because you'll all come up with such proposals. You'll encounter them. So it's so hard because they could promise me, I give you this, you give me that. No, I'd rather lose than gain in that way. I can always go back to just being an activist, a professor, a teacher, a lecturer, a cleaning lady, whoever. But I'm just really determined not to give up on that. Oh, the prophet of the doom, Cassandra. Edwin, you said transparency versus hypocrisy. Well, I am a bit hypocritical, like we all are, I guess. Transparency and truth would be here if my son, Gustav, could be taken out of school, if I could set the school on fire, metaphorically, and tell them, guys, you don't go to school tomorrow because the system is no good. And yet, we don't have the courage to do that. We're not bold enough. What does the system do at school? A teenager aged 15 marching like all the other teenagers to the same tune. And it takes a lot of effort to get rid of that later on. Thank you.
No dobrze, przypominam wszystkim, że
Thank you very much. I want to remind everyone that we're expected, so let's make an effort. We're expected to look for new tools. What Joanna said was valuable because one of the tools is not joining the game as you find it, the pre-existing game, because if you do, then it's difficult to go beyond that scope. So now maybe Dr. Stopp-Rutkowska, who had tried out different tools which didn't work in Białystok. So now you're back to being someone who's calling for the attention of those in power. So what does it look like after all the experience, and how can you circumvent the system? Can you change it? So how can we hack the system? I'm very glad that it's not just Warsaw people who come to this session in Warsaw. I'm glad you invited people from different towns so we can get a different perspective, because listening to what's being said in the capital, I feel that we have a different context, a different perspective. Just by way of an explanation, in Białystok, for the first time, a social committee that was related to urban movements or community activists was set up. This was done 4 years previously in different cities, but in Białystok this was the first time, and I felt that we came as a surprise and a revelation to the local community in Białystok, where we first announced our presence, we first made ourselves seen. Then we managed to register a list, a ballot, but we were a nationwide example of the DONT method, how you can get a lot of votes and not get a seat, the DONT system of voting. And I want to get back to what you asked, and in neither the executive nor we don't have executive or legislative power. We're back to knocking on doors. And knocking on a door that's even more tightly shut. In Białystok, there's the Civic Coalition and the United Right, so it's clearly very polarized. It's a bipartisan system, effectively. But I think a great success, and I don't know how it'll translate into practical developments where it will lead. I think that this campaign, thanks to our participation in Białystok, was different. Partly thanks to our participation, we managed to change the language, we managed to change the public debate, the language of public discourse. It was irritating because all of a sudden it turned out that everybody agrees with us. All of a sudden it transpired that the language of urban movements, because we relied on 15 theses, urban theses, we felt that speaking of urban movements in Białystok was premature because nobody knew what that was, but I felt that we tried to refer to that idea. And then the demands, it turned out that the demands that what we're calling for in these 15 theses is becoming the part of the program of the Civic Coalition and the current mayor. So as an example, let me say that everybody all of a sudden started talking about smog. Monika's from Białystok. She's the head of the Arsenal Gallery. Everybody started talking about culture in a very modern way, using words like participation, grassroots planning, and so on and so forth. And rhetorically, it was a victory. Rhetorically, I'm kind of laughing, but I find it a little amusing because I became part of a wonderful and stream of the romantic topos of the beautiful Polish defeat. So we've scored a moral victory, and now I'm thinking how to translate that moral victory into practice. So I thought about going into politics. I'm an academic, I'm a social activist. I'd never belong, and never do, and still don't belong to any political party, but it was a conscious decision, as the lady here said. Aldona said. I was sick of talking, and I wanted to do something. I also wanted to take responsibility and shoulder the risk, take on the risk, because if you're on the other side, that risk is much greater. And what we have now is that rhetorically, our opponents, the people we ran against, used the same language, but used the same vocabulary, and thanks to that, even though we're back to where we were, the where we are has changed. We have more legitimacy. We can validate what they're doing. We can. So the first thing is the first check was was in terms of smog. A month after the election, we held a conference where we addressed a lot of public FOIA questions to the mayor, asking what can be done, and saying that in keeping with election promises, or as per the election promises, everybody's elected to a nonpartisan debate about how we can fight smog in Białystok. And if not, then our project will become a part of a local resolution, a local initiative, and we will be proceeding this project. This resonated, but it resonated badly. The present mayor said that generally everything's okay, so there's nothing to talk about. But he had to respond to our letter, now where it turned out that things weren't as great as the president claimed it was, and this isn't a new tool, because participatory tools like that have been around for some time now. But going into politics, and this is what's the most important for me, even if you're defeated, it gives you a different perspective. It gives you more social legitimacy. In Białystok, our committee had about 10,000 votes, which in terms of numbers is very good. But on the other hand, I'm depressed. I'm not an optimist. I'm not optimistic here, but I don't think it's sexy. It's very difficult to bring together and mobilize people. I think many of you are aware of this because you're trying to do that. Mobilize people to check, to control the authorities, and also to cooperate. You don't necessarily have to join the opposition. I wanted to send a positive invitation to the present authorities. I want to say that we wanted to cooperate, that you spoke with our voice, that you used our demands, that you spoke our language, and let's sit down around one table. If not, we have to keep knocking or hammering at those doors. And it's not good news. I think it's actually represent a step backwards if we had to resort to that. And speaking of language and vocabulary, this is something I experienced in the campaign, on the campaign trail. And together with Justyna, because there were a lot of women, female candidates running for mayors on the urban movement platform, and all relying on the 15 theses. But the language we spoke, I think, was obscure, was a language that people didn't understand. I canvassed, I went out into the street, town hall meetings, so we spoke with people. We couldn't afford billboards, and it was often shocking because it turns out that I'm not able to speak, that the language I use, language which sounds natural here, is language most people don't understand. And 1 in 3 of the people I spoke to said, what elections? What local elections? What's up? Wait, who are we electing? So tell me, what is it with the councillors and so on? So I needed to do civics classes out there into the street. And that's the way things look. And as I see it, we need to we need to keep knocking at those doors. We need to try and open the door nicely, politely. But if we can't do it politely, we have to do our job. But now we have more legitimacy, and so it's worth being involved in politics. It's worth going into that. It's worth trying, and then you can make your voice heard. Thank you very much, Joanna Schering-Wielgus. You're a politician who I think is the only member of parliament who for some time have tried to tried to practice feminization of politics. I'm referring to everything you do where you used the existing tools, the toolkit that every member of parliament has in a different way. I saw you use your parliamentary immunity, parliamentary ID as an activist. So you used your political ID as a tool, as a way that would enable persons with disabilities and women as a way to obtain something that they wouldn't have obtained if it hadn't been for so you, for instance, helped people avoid being oppressed by the police. You used your political mandate, the fact that you're a member of parliament, to do this. So you're using the tools of this world in a different way, but at the same time, your path in parliament is such that at one point you stopped being a member of the party. The party practically no longer exists. Now you're the leader of a new party, your own party, which for the time being doesn't really have existence. So you're the most active member of parliament who changes reality around her, but that didn't really give you success in parliament, even though it did give you popularity among the people, and people learned that they can trust you, saw that they can trust you. So, but where does it all lead? Will your project be a success? What will this success look like? And do you think that using these tools is a good way forward? Listening to the previous speakers, very briefly, my life flashed before my eyes. I remember when I began in 2008, together with students, we set up an association, a voters association. It was a watchdog organization that was controlling politicians from Toruń. I come from the beautiful city of Copernicus, the city of Toruń. And that, I remember, 2008, that was the first time I encountered politicians face to face. So we did a lot of work. I was the oldest person there. I had previously been in NGOs, but these students saw me as a bumper, as somebody who would be older and who would respond in case anything happened. And what we did in 4 years was incredible. I mean, we controlled the politicians, and we held them accountable for what they did. At first, they didn't care. They asked, they said, "What are you doing? You're doing these surveys." But when we began publishing reports where politicians were graded by us and the media got interested, and then the politicians started seeing us, looking at us more seriously. They started wondering, thinking about what they're doing. I remember a report that we published, and we gave each of these politicians, local politicians in Toruń, and most of them got C's at best, C pluses or C minuses, and this actually worked. And politics always irritated me. It always frustrated me, as politics on TV and on the radio. And in the city of Toruń since 2004, we've been sitting at these debates and talking. But we're also doing a lot. A lot of initiatives have come out of Toruń, initiatives that were implemented nationwide. I'm very proud of that, such as participatory efforts, which were launched in the Sustainable Development Workshop in Toruń. And one day we decided that we're so pissed off with politicians that they're not doing anything, that they're not listening to us in the city of Toruń. Paradoxically, we had a situation where I'm running an NGO, in culture, I did projects for Toruń artists. I had to do that abroad and outside of town because the mayor of my city didn't want these projects done in town because we're critical of the Toruń authorities. And that was a paradox. And most organizations in Toruń actually had to work outside of Toruń. And we were successful, by the way. I was successful worldwide. But and the rainbow that we built with Julita Wójcik in India, that was also funny. So I became a counselor, and then I got on a plane with the Toruń city. I got on a plane and I joined Julita building the rainbow in the Jewish district in a city in India. So, and one day we decided that since we're so irritated, we don't like politics, we'll have to blow it up from the inside. So we've been talking so much, it's time to get to work. We had no money, no clout. We had no help. Nobody helped us. And in 2014, an urban movement was established in Toruń. I mean, it had existed previously, but the great advantage of this movement was that we all knew one another, and it wasn't like Warsaw with Jan Śpiewak, who became a city councillor, and the next day he lost a couple of councillors who changed parties. But since all of us knew one another, we represented different fields, we made a great team. The campaign was horrible. I was running for mayor, the first woman to run against the mayor, the incumbent. And we started our campaign. Let me say, it's an entirely different language, an entirely different message, an entirely different reach, entirely different way of communicating with voters than parties did. It was backbreaking work. I spent 3 months canvassing between 6 a.m. and midnight. I ended up with pneumonia when they were announcing the results. We were all sick, but we were very happy that we'd done a great job, and much to our surprise, we won. We had a great result. We had a result, something that had never happened before in our town. I came second. I won 18% of the vote. I was shocked, and we managed to get 4 seats on the council. So we became the first opposition. We were the first opposition board members who held them accountable, who, as you did in Cieszyn, we paid attention to all the idiotic things in the City Hall. I remember my first month in City Hall. I came home and there were times when I just wanted to quit. I said, God damn it, who am I working with? Who are these people? Who are they? I was thinking about all these other councillors. First, they need to be educated if we want to do something for our city. And so, but now you're in Polish parliament, so I'm sure they're definitely different. You wouldn't. So my first shock came when I was on the city council, and with hindsight, I know that we made a mistake because we had a great program. The program, we'd done research, the first survey, the first in Toruń, based on for the city of Toruń. We did this for 6 months, and we had a great dream of Toruń, the Toruń of our dreams, as we wanted to see it. We also made a mistake, and I can see it with hindsight. We were always opposed to our mayor, so we didn't do what we should have. And what we should have done was negotiate some things, not for our own good, but for the good of the city. But much to our surprise, our mayor took advantage of this, and he began putting into effect items from our program saying that they were part of his platform. And none of us, speaking of tools, took offense. And on the contrary, we were happy. I mean, we were sorry that nobody said that these were our ideas, but that our mayor had hijacked that in a way. But okay, it happened. We also changed the language. We changed the language of debate, this language of debate, and in the local government campaign, all the candidates for mayor kind of spoke, were quoting our platform from 4 years back. So everybody started quoting things, and I attended these debates, these mayoral debates, and I went to these debates, and I was shocked that they were using this in Parliament. Of course, it's a disaster. I mean, nobody expected that, but it wasn't such a shock. But because I had gone through that in the city council, so when I became a member of Parliament, I mean, it's really very difficult. It's difficult at every step. Even this. Arduous work, because you only have 60 seconds to tell everyone in Poland what you want to say about a given draft, a given bill. 60 seconds is very little in parliamentary debates, but then it can be cut short to 30 seconds because they can switch your microphone off if you say something that they don't like, or something that's you can't file a draft, question time doesn't work, and so you need to find a way of being in Parliament, a way of making a difference in Parliament. I wasn't looking for any modality anyway, because I'm first a social activist foremost and a member of Parliament second, and that was me from the start, and I'm very proud of that. So when this entire law and justice began changing, overhauling the country, nobody had to convince me to go out into the street with people, to go to a police station or go to court when people are on trial, when people are arrested. Here, it's something I have inside and something that's normal. Of course, obviously, I know practically all the police officers in Warsaw. I know where all the police stations are. I know where the hospitals are. I know where the courts are. These are the places I know best. And Teatr Powszechny, where I sometimes go, and which also gets a lot of heavy police presence every now and then. But that's also a good way, and I'm also pissed off at the fact that when obviously, I decided that I would leave because it wasn't in line with my values. I left the Nowoczesna party. I didn't like some of their drafts and bills, but I'm mad that when I decide to take my own step, when I decide to do something which I think is really brave, especially for a woman, when I set up a political party, that I, Joanna Szering-Wielgus, setting up a party with Ryszard Petru, the media ignore me because, what I mean, a woman? How can a woman? Why? Who needs a woman? I mean, that's not likely. Nobody's going to talk about that. You're not the leader here. And the next question, why Ryszard Petru? But why not? I've been working with the guy for 4 years, and I'm the one who decides. So, and the reason I'm saying this is, for instance, I don't understand the negative negative response that Justin spoke about. If you can make a change, if you can do something, then let's give people a chance to change it. It's exactly the same with Barbara Nowacka. I supported her, but God damn it, let's trust someone. If they join the coalition, then let's believe that she will succeed. She'll be able to get something done. If I set up a party, I am a social activist. You know me. You know that I'm sincere. Then really, damn it, give me some trust. I mean, trust me. I'm a woman. Trust me, if I don't like it, I'll just leave, which I already have shown myself capable of doing. Thank you very much. And I still haven't been able to convince anyone to speak about the future, to talk about tools, but let's give it another shot. I'm very often, and this is something that I was talking about with Dr. Ewo-Zimny, often at various meetings in feminist congresses and so on. We have this detachment. There are some places where we don't go. One of these places is economics. But if we want to go beyond what's happening, if we want to have a change, then we can't do it by avoiding economics. So we need to move away from neoliberal economics. And Dr. Rumińska told me last year that feminist economics was finally recognized as a distinct strand in economics. And maybe, Eva, you could briefly tell us what tools, what ways of changing reality does feminist economics offer you? Okay, I think I'll live up to your expectations, but first, and talk about tools, but first a few words about language. In the city of Cieszyn, and speaking of the budget, this is one of the problems. Economists use a very hermetic idiom vocabulary. They have their own paradigm. They have their own terms, which differs from human rights language and women's rights language, and this equality, which is promoted by sociologists. This is not something that they can agree on. This is not. It's like talking. It's like we were talking Chinese among one another. So it's Actually, when I joined the Women's Congress and I suggested we talk about economics, they looked at me with suspicion. They thought I was some sort of mole by the business community. They thought that anything that's economic is bad, anything to do with economics is bad. And leading Polish feminists at first came to attend debates to hear what I was saying because they thought I was planted, I was a mole, I was representing a big business that I wanted to turn. I wanted to hijack again the women's movement. And it's very difficult to feminize politics without feminizing economics. That's impossible, actually, and I'll be talking about the budget later on. But first, I think, and speaking of Cassandra, if we are Cassandras, if we are prophets of doom, if we're prognosticating, then even mainstream economy agrees that the classical model, as we know it, is its place is in the textbooks and the history books and the handbooks are still used in the Warsaw Business School, used to teach young economists what the rules of the economy are, that these textbooks ought to be discussed as historical documents. And two things I want to mention. First of all, we need to address the myth that the economics is gender neutral. All economists ought to know that and be aware of that. Why that exists, I won't go into that for lack of time, but the concept of the individual, of Homo economicus, whose behavior is the foundation, is the fundament for all the rules of economics, which tells us how to manage resources to accomplish objectives. And this is what this in the economic being is doing, which the fathers of economics, and economics has only fathers, it doesn't have any mothers, because the first Nobel Prize in economics for a woman came in 2005, and there are only two female economists who are recognized, Joan Robinson and Rosa Luxemburg. She's not really spoken about now, but there are two only females in economics. But getting back to the fathers of economics, they actually created this human being, this who was supposed to be neutral, and this corresponds to a man, to male behavior. Why? Because he has no duties, no obligations. This is somebody who fulfills themselves on the market. They have no family, nobody to care for. And very often this figure is compared. Daniel Defoe wrote Robinson Crusoe, and Adam Smith was the father of economics, and they were contemporaries. So this person is entrepreneurial, and they have a Friday, his man Friday, who loves him, does all the work for no remuneration, nothing in exchange, and Robinson Crusoe therefore can create a small market economy on a desert island. And he's very praised for that, and all economists up until recently, up until the 70s, have said that this is a model of behavior, but we need to do away with that myth. We need to drop that myth. That's not what the economy is about. You don't have this model, this this figure who defines the solutions we adopt in politics. I don't want to say how it impacts politics. A central concept of economics is the GDP, and we want the GDP to go up. GDP growth is a measure of success, and that seems to be what we're going for. But if we take a closer look, turns out that what we have, it's a patriarchal calculation of the budget, because the inputs, budgetary inputs, we forget the reproductive work, by which we mean childbearing, care for the elderly, child care. So the whole caring economy, which is done by women, and that's not included in the figures. But that's not just that's on the income, but expenditure. We have priorities. In outlays, we have priorities. We have spoken about the Greens and their priorities. saying that there's no agreement for there to be this budget for green activities. The priorities are clear when we look at the theory of economics and the models that exist, because there the priority prioritizes investment. Investment leads to increasing the GDP, but costs are usually social costs, and social costs are born when you have quick economic growth and income, so they can be offset, like the Scandinavian countries, which can afford to invest in nurseries, kindergartens, preschools, and so on. And if we compare investing in creches or preschools, nurseries, and investing in infrastructure like highways and stadiums, then obviously the second will win out.
There's no question about it, because in the economic theory, they do it in good faith. That's what they were taught at the universities. That is the way to spur growth and development. You only have 3 minutes. Yes, I'm in control of time. Okay, feminist economy, which has been recognized as part of economy by this conservative, The Economist magazine. It was recently, last year. Well, what are we fighting for? We want to internalize cost, like the green cost, when you estimate your economic growth and all of the economy. What tools do we have? Well, they have been developed quite well, and they are plenty. First, the time budgets. You can calculate the input of care work to the budget via the calculation of work hours spent at home. We have statistics for that. Okay, this statistic has been available since recently. It's now generated by all statistical offices of EU member states. So that's what we have. Second, we have the amounts. The amounts in actually the quotas in politics, in management boards, in business. Quotas are quite controversial. Let's discuss them. Third, we have so-called gender budgets or equality budgets. That's a totally different approach to a budget. I have a specific proposal for the capital city of Warsaw, the city hall. This could be one of your initiatives, okay? To carry out evaluation of Warsaw city budget or a part of that budget through the standpoint of equality objectives. To what extent this piece of expenditure contributes to greater equality? And where is equality the reason for an expenditure? Berlin has done that. Berlin has a gender budget, and many other cities too. It's also done at a national level. A typical dilemma for a city budget in Stockholm, for example, when they did budget evaluation, was what to do in snowstorm, because the money is scarce, the snow plows are just very few. So do we want to remove snow from roads where the cars use, or should we remove snow from sidewalks, pavements, where women with baby strollers walk? Do we invest in boilers or in something else? And last but not least, the instrument number 4, to eliminate wage gap, the so-called wage gap, gender-driven wage gap between men and women. It's a very specific proposition as well. For example, at a city level, could it be Cieszyn town, could it be Białystok, perhaps Warsaw? To carry out an evaluation of wage gap among your staff, Warsaw City Hall personnel. The tool is ready-made. It's an algorithm. The previous cabinet had this idea, and the Ministry of Labour and Social Policy carried that out. The Institute of Structural Research did it, IBS, together with the Institute. So it's a ready-made algorithm. It's enough to take it and use it based on payroll and HR data. The level of wages is not disclosed, okay? All that is disclosed is the gap. The gap is being estimated. Let me just say that the governments of a few countries have already imposed this obligation to report wage gap by corporations, corporate sector entities. The UK, Conservative government, Iceland, and a few other countries as well. This could be combined or not with a sanctioning system if the wage gap is not reduced over time. But anyhow, these two sets of instruments, especially the time budgets and wage gap reduction, they are very down-to-earth measures. I absolutely agree with those who say that let's not talk, let's start doing. Talking, writing, reports, conclusions, recommendations, you name it. I've done it plenty. And I don't like hearing the same arguments after 10 years. Something I said 10 years ago, now you're repeating it about evaluation of the Beijing platform. I was involved there under UNO auspices. So I said, oh my God, that's the same. 10 years have passed and the same appeals are on the agenda. That's it, madam. Well, just one more point. It's very important to introduce feminist economics to economic schools and universities, regardless of their level. In our Congress, we have a network of economists who are active in departments of economics. Thank you. Thank you. Mache, Pedula, you have 10 minutes. What is the question? Mache, I've asked you the question many times over. Okay, I got it. Well, let me start by saying that I'd like to complain a little bit about the difference between feminism and fascism. But as I was listening to your debate, I concluded, no nagging at all. I'm going to support this dichotomy. I was hugely impressed by your manifesto that you read out loud at the very beginning. It's very radical, for starters, and it's a thing new, okay? It's definitely a fresh voice. It might not be heard on the media readily. At the beginning, it could sound a bit exotic. Like, I suppose for us, it's also a bit exotic. When we first heard it, we weren't really sure that that's more weird or queer, okay, than new. But I think it's very powerful, it's important. It really redefines feminism itself. It's not just about the number of women, it's also about fight against oppression towards women. It's a whole new mindset. You're kind of moving the horizon forward, and I love that about your manifesto. I'm not sure if I want to kill your manifesto or if I want to reinforce it. Let's wait to hear what I'm going to say. But when we talk about feminism, feminism today should be against freedom. Well, fascism today is freedom. Fascism means to say anything goes. Anything goes. You can do whatever you like. You can contaminate the planet. You can dominate over other people. You can say things other people don't like you to say. Fascism is freedom. So feminism should be a voice against freedom. Feminism should say, no, there are restrictions. Our planet, there are limits. Our planet is a limit. Respect for others is a limit. And language, public language is a limit. You shouldn't be able to say everything and anything you want. So we need some constraints. I was a bit downput by what Justyna Glusma and Aldona Machnowska-Góra said, because it seemed like they had given up. Like they said, there's only space for very practical measures, but not for work with imagination. For example, I have come up with a very specific proposal quite recently. I suggested we should reduce the number of airplane flights, to introduce a limit for flights. And let me put it mildly, it was not welcome in a positive way, quite on the contrary. And not even political opponents, but also our political supporters that I cooperate with without any names, they were also against it. So you can take it as a very specific task, something to be done. But if you don't add a new language to it, then really there will be no outcome. I'll just be the crazy guy who came up with the idea to limit the number of flights allowed, and that will be the end of it. I kind of love that nickname and label, but still. Okay, that's quite interesting. What does it take to make a change? What should be the impact of new feminism? Are we really convinced that we wouldn't want Jarosław Kaczyński to speak that language? I'm not sure. I don't know. Perhaps if he spoke the language, I wouldn't be bothered. I mean, I don't have to take Jarosław Kaczyński's place. I mean, this is not the key priority. that's at stake, right? But if Lauren Justice or if Civic Platform, if the coalition, any other entity, if they started implementing solutions within that area, like let's not squeeze the institution to the full. You don't want to create that many performances, shows, art pieces. No. Scientific publications. No. You need some freedom, some leeway for reproductive work of the institution, yes? To give them time for thought. What do they want to do? Which way do they want to go? I would be happy with that. What are the channels of social change? That's the question. But you mentioned the tools. Well, let's revisit the way citizens can control politicians in the public arena, not just as the audience, but also as producers. That's very important when we think about funding mechanisms and the way it is set up for people to produce political knowledge and ideas to move the borders of imagination. That's what we are lacking. When you were introducing me, you said I'm an advisor to politicians. Well, I do it with full conviction. I help those who I believe can be the agent of change. But it's also about technology, because the parties will always move within certain political technology. So you can try to make a change, but only to a degree, whereas a true change should go beyond that. For example, I want to have more media controlled by the citizens. Citizens who would generate knowledge, innovation, imagination about what's going on, just for us to have better insights into what's going on in Cieszyn, in Białystok. I loved what Madame Wawrzeczka said. She said that people loved talking about ideas, not just about a bumpy road next to in their neighborhood. And I believe that it can be done. But apart from specific solutions, institutions, etc., there is a challenge lying ahead. I think these tools can help us think, are we able to believe a society of post-growth? A post-growth society, a society without constant increase in GDP levels. To avoid this attitude where the only thing you can digest is the promise of more and then some, more and then some. Bigger apartments, bigger cars, flying more, exotic holidays, etc. That's a very serious challenge. I think people would enjoy discussing it. Edwin mentioned France. Yes, it is difficult when first you reduce the taxes for the richest and then you say, okay, guys, now all those who use cars are going to pay for it. That must be upsetting without a question. But I think we have to consider it. Are we able to create a post-growth society? What would be the hierarchies, the success measures for such a society? And another feminist mission, something that when I say feminism, I also include myself in that area. So that's the question about the New Deal, the global deal, the shape of it, the design of it. It's a very urgent matter. People love to talk about crisis because they feel that something's brewing, that something got messed up, and we need to take action. If Kaczyński wins, that's because he looks like the only politician who wants to do something. His solutions are loony bin, but at least they are some solutions. And others say, don't worry, US is going to defend you no matter what. But it ain't gonna happen. People can sense it somewhere in their guts. People are not stupid. So feminism should consider the new global deal. Is there a chance for a new global deal? It shouldn't be just the lawyers who talk about it. Feminists have to discuss it too. And I guess I had one more point to tackle. Yeah, by way of a summary, I believe there are two paths of change. First, change can be channeled via institutional policy, new actors who face up to the challenge, Poprzeczka and Macron, examples, two distinguished figures of contemporary politics. That proves that people want to have politicians who hit the nail on the head, don't beat about the bush, and call the problems by their name. But the other channel for the change is what the city activists mentioned. with this idea that some slogans had been hijacked. They have hijacked our narration. But I'm happy. If that narration is on top, if that sets the tone, so be it. Perhaps both channels are our channels. We shouldn't disparage any of the two. So in that sense, this could help us oppose authoritarian politics. Not fascist politics, but authoritarian politics. Thank you. Well, since it's a very trade unionized version of the parliament, we only have 15 minutes left, but I'll be happy to give the floor to all other participants to take the floor. Would anyone want to comment, ask a question, make a point? We have one. A question? Not a question. I loved it when you said that feminism and feminists should discuss ideas, not just the bumpy roads. Usually, women who, I don't know, when they start working in some position of power, authority, they become ministers, cabinet members, what do? They do education, social welfare, etc. Because women, they are perceived like, okay, a woman can do something down to earth, something beneficial for the constituency, but if you want to talk about ideas, leave it to men, or just us as women, we don't have enough staying power to get across. Like men talk about ideas and we do the nitty-gritty job on the ground. A simple question, if I may. I'm a doer, not a talker. Some of you might know that. So here's my question. Who of the people in the room leaves the information bubble that we are all in? Who? Who breaks out of that information bubble? What do you mean? Talks to people who... What do you mean by breaking out of the bubble? Yes. I live in between two cities, big cities, Krakow and Warsaw. I was born in Podkarpackie, southeast of Poland. I traveled the country quite a lot, and in Warsaw I often say to my colleagues, also feminists, because I'm a part of the Women's Congress, so I always tell them, be careful not to be Warsaw-centric, because Warsaw-centric attitude is quite common. And I loved it when, I don't remember who said that, one of the ladies, it wasn't you, sir, by the way. So you mentioned the language issue. Oh, Cieszyn, exactly. You all said that. Okay, fair enough. That is an issue, and I'm quite aware of that. Our language of the people who are here in the room, oftentimes it's incomprehensible to people who are on the edge of that pretzel, as someone called it before. Someone else would like to take the floor? Well, I have a question, a quick one. Talk less, do more. What is the telephone number to Rafał Trzaskowski? Can you share it with me? Because for the last 2 years, my colleagues and I, we've been working hard, and we don't have that number. I cannot give you the number because there is GDPR. But I have a suggestion for you. Why don't you use the Secretariat office? Okay, for the last 2 weeks have shown that Mr. Trzaskowski is quite accessible, and I believe he'll be happy to meet you. It's possible, yeah, it's possible. It's a question about a privilege. A privilege? In the sense of having a telephone number to Mr. Trzaskowski. And also the discrepancies between us. Of course we are different. That goes with, I don't want to explain why I have Rafał Trzaskowski's number. Come on, we used to work together. We've been working together for a year. And secretarial office number is publicly available. Was it judgmental? Not really. It was like making a point that if you want to say, let's do it, not everybody can do it in this way. There are many different models of doing things. And I don't think, calling the privileges by the name, it doesn't have to be confrontational, judgmental, and negative. You don't want to drag each other down. You have to be aware of the fact that there is a privilege there, and you should give up on your privilege when it's important to give it up, okay? So I don't want to, during a social women's congress, I don't want to say that there is a precariat, people who live in as janitor, cleaning ladies. No, I make sure that these people can be there at the social congress and speak for themselves. That's how I see my privilege. So I guess that's what the other person meant. Because you have the number, that's great, good for you. But maybe you should make an effort to hear all the different voices that Mr. Trzaskowski doesn't want to listen. And maybe send it to him in a text message. Well, I think I'd like to comment. Well, for me, it does make a difference. Aldona had the number because she had been a social activist 15 years before. And after 2 years of that work, just like you, she didn't have any number to anyone. So that's what it's all about. If you spend many years doing the groundwork as a social activist, in the meantime, you do get the numbers. But the question is it a privilege that somebody will hold you accountable for? And do you have the right? I mean, you have the right to do anything, okay, but now when you say that Rafał Trzaskowski doesn't take the call from other people, that he won't listen, you said there are people he won't listen to. And he's been the mayor for the last 2 weeks, the president of the city of Warsaw. And we don't know. Let's wait a year. Then he will know whether he wants to listen to some people or not. It's too soon, okay? Too early days yet. I'm not for Warsaw, by the way, but Rafał Trzaskowski has been a human being for the last 40-some years, so don't get me wrong. I'm not being judgmental here. I'm just calling things what they are. Don't look for a hidden agenda. Some semantic joke shouldn't make us all jump at each other and discussing what kind of a person current president of Warsaw is and whether he is a person. Come on, let's make good use of the resources we have here. But we're talking about the importance of the language. So that matters. What do you call a privilege? When you say that somebody... Do you see what I'm saying? Language matters. So use language in a very careful way. 5 minutes. Only 5 minutes left. So language, imagination, discourse. Well, it's great to use the synergy effect. We all have different missions, functions, jobs, whether private or professional capacity. Some of us have more capacity to make a difference, to legislate, etc. Let me just say one thing. Some of us can feel that this has been dwelled on for a long time and brought it over. 2 years ago, I was at a different congress of museum workers in Poland, mostly men, maybe 3 women. Museum is in Poland, not modern art, contemporary art museum. No, all kinds of museums you have in Poland were represented. And at that Congress, the major topic was like how productive they were. They were bragging how much money they made, the outsourcing wave, the revenues they've generated, transformation of a museum to a business. That was the absolutely dominant theme. So if you want to create a different language, different perception, there will be a pressure. They wouldn't be able, it would be shameful to brag about it. Yeah, it's shameful to outsource cleaning personnel in the institutions of culture. This should be spoken out loud, yeah? And I want to repeat it over and over again. You're talking about this radical point of the manifesto. Yes. Yes, absolutely. And Zuza, one more person who wants to take over. Last 2 comments, okay? We only have 10 minutes, 10 to 7. If we want to talk about language, let me just say that I'm a PhD student, Warsaw University, and discourse analysis is my forte. And that's quite interesting how we... Well, I came here mostly for the prior discussion. And the way that prior discussion was led, it was so totally different from the way this current discussion is moderated. It's shocking to me. The phrases that were used before, they were totally understandable. And the privilege, well, it's nothing out of ordinary to me, looking at the social sciences, and it's not pejorative in any way. So accusing the person here that she strips Trzaskowski of his humanity. No. I'm just saying that if you want to be precise in our language, let's be... Oh my gosh. All right. Fair enough. Well, I think this conversation, it touches my soul, because it was supposed to be a feminization of politics, and that's not what you're discussing, is it? You talk about women in politics, but we're not talking about a totally different, radical change of politics as we know it. No. I really appreciated what the Chechen lady said. Sorry, I forgot your name. Because I think that, myself as a person who's a university activist, at the university we have never discussed what should a university represent, what should it look like. Even at Warsaw University we never had such a debate, which is a big issue, especially with the 2.0 law. So to recap, in general, if you want to do and not talk, that's fine, but the problem is that we can talk and talk and talk, and we've been talking for 7 years here. But after the 7 years, we come to the meeting in this room, and I feel that, wow, it's like a weird language, totally different from what we had 2 hours ago, and we have a problem striking agreement. We talk at cross purposes. So we've been talking for 7 years. It seems like everything has been covered, and yet it's such an exclusively excluding language myself. I said I had been at this meeting before, and I felt at home, I felt understood, and then 2 hours later, I'm totally unable to capture the point of this discussion and what it's all about. A different bubble. That's the problem. A whole new bubble. People who do politics in practice, I agree with you, that I want to talk about, the tools that we could use to get out of this comfort zone. But yeah, I haven't been able to do that, I admit, because the answers were mostly about what the reality is, by and large, in contrast to what it could be if we could transgress. But there's also some feedback, okay? Each debate was different. Each debate had a different set of representatives from a different area. Sure, I get it, but I'm just trying to say that the discourse that we apply in our debate, it's so different that in actual fact, it's difficult to, in any way, to compare one to the other at all, because even the same words are uttered, but their meaning is completely different.
Mamy ostatnie 3 minuty, słuchajcie.
3 minutes left. We heard from the gentleman here, and then, the gentleman wanted to say something. Zuza wants to say something. You get 45 seconds, and so does Zuza. Okay, I'll try to be very brief then. You spoke about language, about practical deeds, action. We speak and they don't understand us. We speak and they don't understand. So we speak, we pontificate, and they don't understand. That's not the way it ought to be seen, phrased. We don't understand what they're saying, and we're speaking, but why don't we listen? More questions, less statements, less messages, and that's a very practical demand. Now, Zuzanna. I wanted to comment on deeds, words, doing, talking. We need both. But I wanted to say I'm in the board of a new artistic award, a new artistic prize next Saturday. This prize will be awarded in Zachęta. It's a contemporary art prize. It's artistic, but it's also very political. Why? Our board, even though it's award for artists, first we decided to give this award exclusively to women. Until women, we have young artists and experienced Polish and international artists, at least until there is some sort of Polish female artists are sufficiently appreciated. Their work represents only 25% of the collections of contemporary art collections in the centenary of emancipation, when men and women are equal. So this is a specific thing that feminizes. It radically feminizes. I don't think, let's not burn committees, let's set up our own. So, and the Warsaw City Council last Thursday adopted a resolution that a new historical award will also have full parity. And at least the board will have full parity. So these are small steps, but these are specific steps, particular steps that need to be taken as of the day before yesterday. No microphone, but nobody said that. That people who go into politics, no, I don't think I ever said, I never said that. You can listen to the recording, I'm sure I never said that. And now, since we have to end this discussion here, we can continue talking informally. I have to hand it over to our host, Paweł Łysak, and I want to ask all our curators, and let's stand here together. I wanted us to end together, right? Thank you very much to all the participants of this meeting, of this two-day meeting. I think a lot of important things have been said. Maybe not everything's been said, and certainly this is a beginning. Apologies for, I think this is a beginning, but over the few years we've been working from the Congress through last year's forum, I think we've come up with an idea, a method, and that this feminization, which has to do with the values we discussed, care, cooperation, and so on, respecting the resources, physical bodily resources and natural resources, this is something that ought to be put into effect in at various junctures and in various places. That's what we want to do, and I welcome the manifesto that we heard from the Pope lecterns, and I think that as of April, we will be inviting you for these stories to hear more, and we would like for next year's forum to be about fascism as well, to address fascism or anti-fascism specifically on this 80th anniversary of the outbreak of World War II. At 7:30 p.m. there's a screening downstairs in the room, and as of 7 p.m. the Dream Adoption Society, a new space. We have Krzysztof Garbaczewski's installation. We have the Mache in this set here, and which is why we need to end. And on the small stage, it's just to blow my own horn a little. That's How to Save the World, which is a production directed by Paweł Łysak. Thank you very much.